Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. I'm putting myself in something of a mildly dangerous situation in that I am recording this segment dealing with an issue that the story sort of began just a few days ago, and yet may not reach its climax until tomorrow as you listen. I'm referencing, of course, the departure of the U.S. military from Afghanistan and the humanitarian crisis that's been going on since then as Americans, including embassy workers and soldiers, as well as Afghanis who were known to be friendly to the United States, are desperately trying to get out of that country while the country is under control of the Taliban, which shift in power and authority has happened just in the last week. Now, it's not my intention, as per usual, to spend a lot of time unpacking the actual news itself, or even necessarily taking a side on the issues. But rather, I'd like to take another step back and talk today, about a lesson that we can learn from this. And that lesson is about partisanship. It seems to me that we all face the temptation to look at tragedy and calamity, whether there is actual blameworthiness or not, and I'm not taking a side one way or the other, but whether there's blameworthiness or not, we tend to seize upon difficult stories to win points in our political disputes. Every single time there is a mass shooting, we have people screaming and screeching for greater gun control. Whenever President Trump was in office and something went bad overseas somewhere, people would screech against President Trump. And today, people are screeching against President Biden. Not just Trumpsters, not just Republicans, but many, many Democrats as well. And there are nuanced articles about arguments about, well, what does it mean to leave a country in this kind of situation? Is it possible to get out safely? And what's the protocol for doing this? And how long have we been there? How long should we have been there? Etc., etc. But what I notice is, again, people are less concerned about the truth than they are scoring political points. And what saddens me is when people on my side of the political aisle do this, and in so doing, diminish the very lives they are purporting to defend. Let me unpack that for you a little bit here. I'm not, in any way, stretch or form, a Democrat at all. I am far, far too conservative for the Democrats. Most of the time, I'm too conservative for the Republicans. So, I carry no brief for President Biden or any Democratic politician anywhere. I just don't. And I tend to tend very much toward the isolationist side of foreign policy, believing that American empire building is wicked and dangerous and foolish and destructive. So in one sense, I'm very glad for the military to be out of Afghanistan. On the other hand, one of the reasons I'm very glad is because I hate to see people die. I hate to see people die for political reasons. But what I want you to notice is when a conservative jumps up and down and says, look how horrible, look how terrible, these people are dying because of Biden. They're dying because of Biden. It seems to me, in some situations, I'm not accusing everybody, but it seems to me that some people are falling to the temptation to look at these deaths as a fruitful means to pummel the president. Now remember, I'm far from being a Democrat. Far, far too conservative to be that. In many ways, I'm not in the least bit concerned about pummeling a Democratic president. And I could give you a long list of things he should be pummeled for. But I don't want to, when I'm looking for a stick to beat the Democrats with, I don't want to pick up a dead person's coffin. Because that's dishonoring to the dead person. The problem isn't that a Democrat did this or did that. The problem is that the president did this or didn't do that. And, by the way, his senior military didn't stop him. Seriously, if you want to talk about what concerns me about the U.S. military, it's not losing our macho. It's not that tiny little nations like Afghanistan are going to think they can push us around. None of that stuff bothers me. What bothers me is how political the whole thing has become, such that we not only have people in positions of the highest leadership in the military refusing to speak out against an ill-advised departure plan for fear of offending the president, but also embracing all the lunacy of this social experiment of intersectionality and all that nonsense. We have Joint Chiefs whose zeal and passion is not for the defense of this country, but for social experimentation. That's what concerns me. But as always, what I want to encourage us to do is to spend less time pointing out the flaws of our ideological foes and looking for the beams in our own eyes. And this is one of those places. How dare we use the dead bodies of people who were tragically exposed to such danger as a part of political theater? I think everybody on every side of the aisle ought to be able to mourn the deaths of these folks. On the other hand, I also think everybody on any side of the political fence ought to be able to mourn the deaths of the people who die in wars we shouldn't be in, that we haven't left yet. I think we should mourn the deaths of soldiers who die in useless wars being promoted by Republicans and useless wars being promoted by Democrats. But when we defend useless wars being waged by our side and attack useless wars being waged by the other side, Our issue is not with useless wars and the deaths that they bring. Our issue is with the party. And, again, the dead soldiers are just a means to an end to our political objectives. Friends, if we can't do better, if we can't be better than our ideological foes, what good are we? If you think to yourself, hey, if I don't make these points now, then we're never going to get rid of Biden. Or if I don't make these points now, we're never going to get a Republican majority back. If I let these Democrats speak ill about this Republican or that Republican, then we're going to lose power. Oh, my stars. And if I don't respond to their rhetoric with similar rhetoric, then no one's going to hear me. You know what? Then don't be heard. It really, really matters that we should learn to do the right thing. That we should learn the faith to trust God to bring the ends He wishes to bring. I'm reminded of Nebuchadnezzar coming against Josiah. And Josiah, he prays and he prays and he prays and he prays and he prays. And God calls Nebuchadnezzar away. And he spares them. And God says, you know why I spared you? I spared you because you turned to me. Before they turned to them, Nebuchadnezzar's soldiers are all yelling at the people in Jerusalem. Hey, we've conquered everybody. You know, every country we come to, every city we come to, the people are crying out to their own local God saying, rescue us, rescue us. And every single one of them got conquered. So when your king comes to you and says to you, hey, cry out to the living God, you need to know that that hasn't worked anywhere else. And he's deceiving you and he's leading you into defeat. And the people said, Josiah, we're with you. We're going to turn to God. And God rescued them. When the left practices dirty tricks, uses illegitimate rhetoric, turns dead bodies into political points, just say no. Don't join in that foolishness. Let's be men and women of integrity. We come now in our ongoing series on the books of the Bible in 5 minutes, to our look at the book of Colossians. This is another epistle from the Apostle Paul. Typically, scholars agree that it was written by Paul around AD 62, about the time that Paul was imprisoned in Rome, and was probably delivered to the church at Colossae by a couple of Paul's dear friends, including Onesimus from the book of Philemon, same character. What's going on in Colossians is recognized to be that there is a heresy that is sort of creeping into the church there, and Paul is wanting to address and correct any of the errors that come alongside that heresy. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a clear, specific, draw a bead on it and shoot it kind of picture of what this specific heresy is. On the plus side, the answer to the heresy, and this is why it's such a beautiful book, the answer to the heresy seems to be for Paul to write an epistle that lifts up the glory of Christ. including the divinity of Jesus, the atonement of Jesus, the conquest of Jesus. All of these things are ways in which Paul writes to the church at Colossae and says, hey, you need to make sure you understand this about Jesus, or you will fall into this heresy that is coming through you, or into you. Colossians chapter 1 includes affirmations from Paul that Jesus is the Son of God, that he is the image of the invisible God, that through him all things are created, that he pre-exists all things, he holds all things together, that he's the head and origin of the church, the firstborn from the dead, he's first place in everything, and oh, here's one, all the fullness of the deity dwells in him. You know, I don't know a lot about apologetics and evangelism with respect to the Church of Latter-day Saints. I know that there are lots and lots of ministries devoted to just that. And I do know that typically when we engage in debate with maybe someone that comes to our door, we turn to John chapter 1, which is one of those places that seems to be the most clear affirmations of the deity of Christ. But I would say this is pretty clear too. In Jesus, in him, the fullness of the deity dwells. It's hard to imagine, and maybe someone out there knows how the Mormons deal with this particular text, because it's hard to imagine how to get away from that. The book goes on to affirm various and sundry other elements of who Jesus is. It talks about Jesus throughout the first and second chapters, talking about his knowledge, about how he holds all the treasures of wisdom, all of these things that are glorifying to him. But then he also spends a fair amount of time emphasizing the humility of Jesus, his nearness to us. And I think that can kind of push away against one of the potential heresies that might be coming alongside here is the Gnostic heresy. And one of the Gnostic heresies, one of the centers of the Gnostic heresy, is this idea that certain people are in the know. That's where the word comes from. Gnosis means knowledge. Certain people are in the know, and it's secret esoteric knowledge that some people have, and they may share it with others through certain ceremonies and rituals, sort of like the Masons. And in doing this, there's a lot of pride. In fact, when you look at Gnostic theology, it's really very silly and hard to take seriously. And it makes you realize that the real appeal is not the sophistication of the ideology, but the secrecy, the whole inner circle kind of element. And that, again, feeds on pride. And so when Paul is emphasizing the humility of Christ, he's pushing against that propensity that we have, which, by the way, can happen even in sound churches. There are those who look at advanced theological knowledge as a kind of second blessing, something that puffs us up. That's why Paul warns in Corinthians that knowledge puffs up. So, at the end of the day, this is a book about Jesus, and that's what makes it so wonderful, because it's about our wonderful Savior. It is about his glory and his standing, but it is also about his humility and his stooping. And it answers every temptation that might draw us away from him. We won't find satisfaction in our own pride. We won't find satisfaction in secret knowledge and hidden knowledge, but rather we will know Christ, and we will know him in all of his ways, both that glorification and that humiliation. So check out the book of Colossians and give it a good study and a read, and you'll come away, I trust, with deeper joy and better worship of Jesus, our Redeemer. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com and join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.